Before South Africa had a name, before the arrival of European ships and the marking of maps, it was already a land teeming with life, a land of rich stories and diverse people, a place where ancient cultures thrived, leaving their indelible mark on the landscape. The Khoisan, the first inhabitants of this ancient land, with their deep connection to nature, lived in harmony with the land for millennia, their lives intertwined with the rhythms of the seasons and the bounty of the earth. They were skilled hunters and gatherers, masters of survival in a challenging environment. Their legacy is carved into ancient rock art, a testament to their beliefs, their stories, and their deep understanding of the world around them. These paintings offer a glimpse into the minds of the people who first walked this land. Centuries later, Bantu-speaking peoples migrated south from other parts of Africa, bringing with them new technologies like farming and ironworking, as well as new languages and social structures. This migration led to a complex interplay of cultures, blending and sometimes clashing with those already here, creating a vibrant tapestry of traditions and beliefs. Powerful kingdoms like Mapungubwe rose to prominence, demonstrating sophisticated social organization and economic power. They engaged in trade with distant lands, exchanging goods and ideas, and leaving behind remarkable treasures like the golden rhinoceros, a symbol of their wealth and artistry. These societies thrived for centuries, developing complex political systems, intricate social structures, and rich cultural traditions long before Europeans arrived on the scene. This demonstrates that Africa's history was rich, complex, and self-sufficient, with its own unique trajectory of development. The land was a mosaic of diverse groups, the Khoisan with their unique clicked languages and ancient traditions, Bantu-speaking groups like the mighty Zulu, known for their military prowess and vibrant culture, the Xhosa, with their rich oral traditions and distinctive social customs, the Sotho and the Tswana, each contributing to the rich cultural tapestry of the region, each with their own unique cultures, languages, and ways of life. This was South Africa for thousands of years, a vibrant, diverse world, a land of ancient beginnings and enduring traditions, unaware of the dramatic changes that were soon to come, changes that would forever alter the course of its history. Our story begins not with the arrival of ships from distant lands, but with the stories of the people who called this land home, the people who shaped its history and left their mark on its soul. The story of South Africa is etched into the very landscape of the Cape. It's a tale of exploration, ambition, and the clash of cultures that would forever alter the course of history. In 1652, Dutch ships, weathered from months at sea, first appeared on the horizon, arriving at Table Bay. The towering Table Mountain served as a majestic backdrop to this pivotal moment. These weren't explorers seeking new lands to claim, but rather a company of merchants, sent not to conquer vast territories, but with a far more pragmatic goal, to set up a vital supply station. This outpost was intended to serve the sprawling trade network of the Dutch East India Company, providing fresh provisions and a safe harbor for their ships. What began as a small, carefully cultivated garden intended to replenish ship stores quickly grew beyond its initial purpose. It blossomed into a burgeoning settlement, attracting settlers eager to carve out a new life. And as these settlers, the Boers, began to expand their farms and stake their claim on the land, they inevitably encroached upon the territory of the indigenous Khoisan people, sparking conflict over precious resources like cattle and the very land itself. This marked the beginning of a long and painful struggle for control of the Cape. To fuel their growing agricultural ambitions, the Dutch turned to a dark solution: the importation of slaves. These enslaved people were forcibly brought from across Africa and Asia, creating a society that was undeniably diverse in its composition, but tragically, deeply unequal in its structure and opportunities. The Cape Colony's very foundation was thus built on the backs of forced labor and the dispossession of the Khoisan, a legacy that would cast a long shadow. This initial period of Dutch settlement, marked by both progress and profound injustice, was setting a pattern for the complex and often turbulent centuries that would follow. Then, as the winds of global power shifted, the British arrived on the scene, their imposing ships appearing in the same waters that the Dutch had once claimed as their own. They strategically seized the Cape, recognizing its immense value as a crucial naval base and trading hub along the vital sea route to the east. For the Boers, accustomed to their own way of life, British rule brought about significant changes. It meant the imposition of new laws, the introduction of a new language into official affairs, and perhaps most significantly, the abolition of slavery, a move that struck at the very heart of their economic and social structure, threatening their established way of life. The British brought with them radical ideas about governance and social reform, ideas that challenged the existing order. But these changes, while intended to modernize the colony, also inadvertently deepened existing divisions and created new tensions within the already complex social fabric. The seeds of South Africa's future conflicts, the struggles that would define its identity for generations to come, were undeniably sown at the Cape during this tumultuous period. It was a time when cultures collided, often violently, and when the balance of power shifted constantly, leaving a legacy of resentment and unresolved issues. The colony was rapidly transforming, becoming far more than just a convenient stopover for ships on long voyages. It was evolving into a fiercely contested battleground, where different groups vied for control, resources, and the right to shape its destiny. The stage was now irrevocably set for a protracted and deeply impactful struggle, a struggle that would ultimately shape the very identity of the nation of South Africa. The Boers, feeling threatened by British rule and the end of slavery, embarked on the Great Trek, seeking freedom inland. But the interior was home to powerful African kingdoms, especially the Zulu under Shaka, who built a formidable empire. As Voortrekkers moved north, clashes erupted, most famously at the Battle of Blood River, where Boers defeated a massive Zulu force. This victory fueled Afrikaner nationalism, while the Zulu suffered a devastating loss. The region became a triangle of conflict: Boers establishing republics, British expanding their empire, and African kingdoms fighting for survival. South Africa's future was forged in these brutal confrontations as each group fought for land, power, and identity. The land was never empty; it was contested at every turn. The struggle for control would only intensify. The legacy of these battles still echoes today. The landscape of South Africa was forever altered by the glittering promise hidden beneath its soil. Everything changed irrevocably with the serendipitous discovery of diamonds in 1867. This single event would set off a chain reaction, impacting the social, economic, and political spheres of the region for generations to come. The allure of precious stones was soon followed by an even greater revelation: the vast gold deposits discovered in 1886. This discovery, centered around the Witwatersrand, amplified the existing fervor and intensified the scramble for riches. The diamond rush transformed the sleepy town of Kimberley into a bustling, chaotic global hotspot, attracting prospectors, adventurers, and opportunists from every corner of the world. Fortunes were made and lost overnight, fueling a frenzied atmosphere of hope and desperation. Simultaneously, the promise of gold turned Johannesburg into a booming city almost overnight. Tents and shacks gave way to brick buildings as the city rapidly expanded to accommodate the influx of people seeking their share of the golden bounty. The British, ever eager to expand their empire and control the burgeoning wealth, swiftly annexed the diamond fields, consolidating their power and influence in the region. This move was seen as a strategic imperative to secure their economic interests. This blatant grab for territory and resources deeply angered the Boers, the fiercely independent Afrikaner settlers who had long called this land home. They viewed the British actions as a direct threat to their autonomy and way of life. To fuel the insatiable demand for labor in the mines, black laborers were forced into harsh, segregated compounds, living in deplorable conditions and subjected to brutal treatment. These compounds became symbols of oppression and inequality. This system of forced labor and segregation laid the groundwork for future exploitation and discrimination, creating a deeply unjust society where the wealth generated by the land was not shared equitably. The immense riches of the land fueled an intense rivalry between the British and the Boers, each vying for dominance and control over the lucrative resources and strategic territory. This rivalry would ultimately erupt into open conflict. The escalating tensions and unresolved disputes eventually led to the devastating Anglo-Boer Wars, a series of bloody conflicts that would reshape the political landscape of South Africa. The wars were brutal and unforgiving, characterized by a scorched earth policy, the widespread use of concentration camps, and immense suffering inflicted upon both combatants and civilians alike. The human cost of these conflicts was staggering, leaving deep scars on the collective psyche of the nation and exacerbating the existing divisions within South African society. Despite fierce resistance from the Boers, the British ultimately emerged victorious, solidifying their control over South Africa and its vast mineral wealth. However, This victory came at a terrible cost, leaving deep and lasting scars between the English and Afrikaans communities, fostering resentment and mistrust that would persist for generations. The scramble for wealth fundamentally reshaped South Africa, entrenching existing divisions and creating a system of profound economic inequality that favored the white minority at the expense of the black majority. This unequal distribution of wealth and power laid the stage for a new kind of oppression, paving the way for the implementation of apartheid, a system of institutionalized racial segregation and discrimination. The land's abundant riches, initially seen as a source of prosperity and progress, would ultimately become both a blessing and a curse, fueling conflict and exacerbating social divisions. The fight for control of South Africa's resources and its future was far from over, setting the stage for decades of political struggle and social unrest. After the Anglo-Boer War, the British unified the colonies into the Union of South Africa in 1910, but only for whites. The Natives' Land Act of 1913 reserved most land for whites, dispossessing millions of black South Africans. Black people became cheap labor, forced into reserves and controlled by past laws. This system of segregation was designed to keep black South Africans excluded and exploited. In response, black leaders formed the South African Native National Congress, later the ANC, seeking justice through peaceful protest. Their struggle was met with indifference, but the seeds of resistance were planted. The foundations of apartheid were laid, and the long fight for equality had begun. The promise of unity was a lie for most South Africans. In 1948, apartheid became official policy, enforcing racial separation in every aspect of life. Laws like the Group Areas Act and Population Registration Act tore families apart and dictated where people could live, work, and learn. Black, colored, and Indian South Africans faced daily humiliation, forced removals, and inferior education. Past laws turned the country into a prison for the majority. The system was enforced with relentless cruelty, designed to keep non-whites powerless. Yet even in the darkest times, people resisted, finding ways to keep hope and culture alive. Apartheid was more than laws. It was a daily assault on dignity, but the human spirit proved resilient. The struggle for freedom would not be silenced. Decades of peaceful protest were met with violence, most shockingly at Sharpeville in 1960, where police killed 69 unarmed protesters. The massacre marked a turning point. Resistance went underground, and the ANC formed a military wing. Leaders like Nelson Mandela were imprisoned, but the spirit of defiance endured. In 1976, the Soweto uprising saw students protest against Afrikaans in schools. Police responded with bullets, and the world saw the brutality of apartheid. The image of Hector Peterson became a symbol of the struggle. The uprising ignited a new wave of activism, led by young leaders like Steve Biko and the Black Consciousness Movement. Biko's death in custody only strengthened the movement. The townships became battlegrounds for freedom, and the world could no longer look away. The resistance was now unstoppable. The fight for justice had reached a new intensity. The world responded to apartheid with boycotts, sanctions, and growing outrage. South Africa became a pariah, isolated from sports, trade, and diplomacy. Inside the country, the 1980s saw mass protests, strikes, and brutal crackdowns. The United Democratic Front united communities in resistance, while the government declared states of emergency. The cost of apartheid became unsustainable, economically and morally. Secret talks began between the government and Nelson Mandela. In 1990, President F.W. de Klerk unbanned the ANC and released Mandela after 27 years in prison. The walls of apartheid were finally crumbling. The world watched as South Africa stood on the brink of transformation. The long walk to freedom was nearing its end. Hope was returning to a wounded nation. Mandela's release was the start of a new era, but the transition was fraught with violence and uncertainty. Through negotiation and reconciliation, South Africa avoided civil war and held its first democratic elections in 1994. For the first time, all South Africans voted, black, white, colored, and Indian, ushering in a new age. Mandela became president, symbolizing hope and unity. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission sought healing through truth, not vengeance. Yet, the legacy of apartheid lingers. Deep inequality, poverty, and political challenges remain. South Africa's journey is unfinished, a testament to resilience, but also a reminder that freedom's promise must be fought for every day. The Rainbow Nation's story continues, shaped by its past and its dreams for the future.